Saints, good morning. Now that Martha has arrived, we ask that we all may rise to our feet as we open up with a word of prayer. And once again, we just see how far the Lord would lead us in this great lesson that we have before us today. So with that being said, shall we have a word of prayer? Father, it's once again upon this hour and upon this day that as always, we come to you with a humble heart. We come right now, dear Father, giving your name all praise, all glory, and honor. And right now, dear Lord, we thank you for allowing us to assemble together once again as brothers and sisters, as one family in Christ, to go over what thus saith this, your word. And as always, we ask that you would bestow upon each one of us just some knowledge from on high, that we all may be able to clearly understand this word that you are giving to us this day. We ask blessing upon those that are here, dear Lord, and those that are still on their way. And truly, dear Lord, bless those, for whatever reason it could be, that they are not here upon this day. But we know, dear Lord, that you are yourself in their very presence. So in Jesus' name, dear Lord, we give this prayer. And thank you for all that you have done and all that you are doing in our lives. In his name we pray. Amen. Well, once again, good morning to everyone. I guess you could say as a recap, as we know that previously we had unit number 1. Unit number 1 was composed of 4 lessons that all dealt with understanding God's kingdom. And when it came to understanding God's kingdom, those 4 lessons we went over in heavy detail so we could get the understanding of what the kingdom truly was all about. And one of the biggest things we drew from those lessons was that God's ways are not our ways, neither are his thoughts our thoughts. This is why the writer in unit number 1, in lesson number 1, called the lesson the upside down kingdom. We could say it's, I guess a word I can use is contrary to our ways. We could call it backwards. We could call it even in reverse, because God does things totally different from our mindset. 2 examples, you'll find that one is that typically you won't find where he will take something that's great and make it greater. Usually God goes, from our point of view, the backwards way. He will take something that's nothing and will make it great. Another thing about that lesson, it taught us that we are at the mindset that when it comes to those who are against us, or if we can use that word, our enemies, we would say we hate our enemies and we despise them. But God said you are to love your enemies and you are also to pray for your enemies. So once again, that's totally backwards from what it is that we are accustomed and that we are used to. But that's the way God functions. And now we have the understanding of God's kingdom. And since we understand that kingdom, the question is, how do we respond to that kingdom? How do we respond to this way of thinking? This is why unit number 2, which we are in now, is titled Responding to God's Kingdom. And if you recall, the first lesson, that was one of the responses we gave to his kingdom, is that of prayer. That first lesson, it dealt with praying to God. It was a lesson that dealt with how his disciples had took notice of Jesus and his oftentimes praying. The gospel writer Luke records throughout his scriptures Jesus praying, that his disciples came to him and said, Lord, teach us how to pray as John taught his disciples. So they wanted to know the right way in which to pray, the right way to go to God. So Jesus gave them what we call the model prayer. And that, my people, is just that. In Luke 6, it is the model prayer, not officially the Lord's Prayer, even though oftentimes it's called the Lord's Prayer. The Lord is praying or giving them the prayer they should pray, but it is not the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer is John 17. That lesson we dealt with was the model prayer, which Jesus gave them, you could say, a pattern or examples and things they should use to have the mindset of when they are praying. It doesn't mean that when you pray, you have to pray in that particular order, the way he lined things up. He was basically saying when you pray, have this in mind when you're praying, such as our Father which art in heaven. When he talks about our Father, that's basically talking about a collective of believers. I've often said, and I say again, that all people are God's creation, but not all people are children of God. Those who are children of God know him and call upon his name and believe in him and that of his Son. And this is why they can use those words, our Father. And he wants them to think about it. When they say Father, you'll find that man has many man-made, made-up deities out there. But none of them have anyone ever referred to as being their Father. So that gives us some intimacy when you give those words. And then he said, hallowed be thy name. What he was speaking of there is that when you pray, address God in the right way, you could say in reverence and respect his name. You are not to call him out of his name, such as the slang we hear out there today, the old man, the man upstairs, father time and the big guy and so on from this. No, you are to give his name reverence and is to be hallowed. Then he also spoke about how thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, your desire is that God's kingdom will come and things will be the same way in heaven as they should be upon this earth. So you're looking for the blessings of God upon you. But that's what that lesson dealt with. Today we move a little bit beyond that lesson to a new lesson. This is the second lesson that we have for unit number 2. Unit number 2 composed of 6 lessons, the largest unit we have for this quarter, and all of them fall on the responding to God's kingdom. But what is the title of the lesson we have before us? Do you notice anything about that title that jumps out at you? When you read it, do you just read it or do you see anything there? It's all capital letters. Exclamation mark. All these are true. Now, I noticed all that, but then I also looked at the words heavily too. Accept God's invitation. It doesn't say like accepting God's invitation or would you accept God's invitation. The way the writer put it is almost like a command. It says accept God's invitation. And there's excitement behind that to accept the invitation. Now, we have to understand an invitation and why they're invitations. Typically, the invitation is given because somebody's having some kind of event, right? And to them, or shall we say it's a grand event, something great is going on. So the person desires for you to be what? There. They want you to be a part of this great celebration. So they send you now forth an invitation. And oftentimes when they send an invitation, they're looking for what? A response back. And usually you have to respond by what? A certain date, because time is of the essence. And the event has a time period also of when it would take place. But one of the key things about the invitation is this. The choice is yours, and whether you accept it or you don't accept it. That's a choice you have to make. Now, we know sometimes you don't accept things. Why? Because other things are going on. You've already made previous arrangements or whatever it may be. But the invitation still is given, and that choice lies with you. And I've always said God is biased because God gives you the choice of whether you accept his invitation or you don't accept it. But he's always nudging you on his side by letting you know this is what I have for you. But if you do not accept what I have, the only thing that's left is what Satan has for you. And what I offer is a lot better than what he has. So this is why the writer says, accept God's invitation. In other words, it's something that should be, it shouldn't be a hard decision to make. In other words, this is what you need, and this is what we have for you. So this is what we're dealing with this morning. We're still coming out of the writings according to Luke. As we said before, a little background on Luke. Luke is not one of the 12 apostles. Luke is not one of the 12 disciples. He is a disciple, but he didn't walk with Jesus. He mainly walked with Paul on his 2nd, 3rd, and 4th missionary journeys. In Paul's writing, he talks about he was a physician in the medical field and so on. Also, he is a non-Israelite. He is the only, you could say, Gentile writer you have in the New Testament. And he decided to write this information because people had given eyewitness accounts of the things that went on with Jesus. But he said, I investigated these things for myself, and I decided to tell them to you in my own way. So now Luke presents his writings. But in the opening of our lesson today, we deal with accept God's invitation. We're starting in Luke 14, the 7th verse. Now, I could start right there, but I'm not because I need to set the stage here. You'll find we have to go back to the first verse. This is why I often say when the lesson comes before us, there are many things that will come up that may not be part of our printed text, but they are part of the lesson. Because these first 6 verses kind of put things in place. You can understand why Jesus now is saying the words that he's saying in our lesson before us. So in the gospel according to Luke, the 14th chapter, I'm going to go through the first 6 verses to set the stage here. And it starts off by saying these words. And it came to pass, as he went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day. First of all, as Luke writings often does, it says it came to pass. Now, here's a tough question for you. I know you might not remember this, but I said it a couple times last week. Small piece of information, that way it might have slipped by you. When it says it came to pass, how many times did Luke give those words? Anybody remember? It came to pass. Anybody remember? Just a small piece of information. Well, totally, it was 457 times it's in the Bible. But in the gospel writings of Luke, in Luke, he records it 40 times. So you see a particular style there. Remember, Luke also wrote another book. What book was that? The book of Acts. He writes that 15 times. So you can see his style of writing. And when he says it came to pass, he's pretty much saying that it gives us now, when that phrase is used, that a certain amount of time has gone by. I've often said that sometimes we know exactly how much time has gone by. Sometimes we don't know, just that time has gone by. Most of the time, it's used as just the opening to a statement. In other words, like when we read a story in our day and time, it says once upon a time, and we go from there. But most of the time when I read it, I always read it this way, and this is what happened next. Because that's what usually happens. When you see that phrase, he's going to tell you what came about next. So it says it came to pass. You could say what happened next was this. He went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees. Now, on the Sabbath day, Jesus went into the house of chief Pharisees for the have dinner, which means that Jesus didn't just walk in this person's house. He had to receive a what? An invitation to go. And we talk about the chief Pharisee here. This is not the head Pharisee. You'll find that the head one would be called the high priest. But when they say chief Pharisees, they had many Pharisees in the community, but you'll find the chief Pharisees were those who were above other Pharisees, if you follow what I'm getting at. In other words, you had a hierarchy. There were more than just one of the chief Pharisees themselves. Then the Pharisees, keep in mind, were very respected in the community. You could say really the most respected. They had a pious attitude about themselves in their walk. They were strict adherers to the law. They themselves taught the law. They were highly educated, and people admired them, and they were part of the Sanhedrin, which was, you could say, I call it the Jewish Supreme Court. So they're very respected people, but this is not any Pharisee. This is one of the chief Pharisees that Jesus now has accepted an invitation to go to his house on the Sabbath day for what is known as dinner time. But keep in mind, sometimes when people invite you to things, some people have ulterior motives to bring you there. And you'll find with Christ, this is the case. Because it says here, and it came to pass as he went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day, that they watched him. Now you'll see in the other synoptic gospel that oftentimes they would watch Jesus for a purpose. They weren't there to learn or be educated on his teachings. They wanted to catch him in some form or way of messing up, so they could have an accusation to bring against him, especially when it came to this thing called the law. Because they said he had come to change the law, he had come to pervert the law, and they even said he had came to destroy the law. Because Jesus, you remember, came in a different fashion. It said they was astonished at his doctrine, because he taught as one who had authority and not as the scribes. So they looked at Jesus like, you're trying to change things. But you said, no, I've come not to destroy, but to fulfill the law itself. But yet they're watching Jesus. Now keep in mind, the Pharisees, not all of them disliked Jesus, but typically most of them had it out against him. So now one has invited him to dinner to see what he would do, and said they watched him. And then in verse 2, Luke says, and behold, there was a certain man. When he says, and behold, when he gives that statement, always pay attention. Because when he says, and behold, what he's saying is, listen up. Something's about to happen. This is what's going on. Pay attention. In other words, he want to bring your attention to what's going on. He says, behold, there was a certain man before him which had the dropsy. In other words, there was a man before him now that had a physical ailment or a physical illness. The dropsy, I think they even call that hydrodropsy. Today's term, they might call it, if I remember correctly, edema. I think it's edema or something of that nature. It's basically, as they call it, a retention of fluid in the body tissue. In other words, like when you see people with severely swollen legs, ankles, and their arms are swollen because they're retaining fluid. That can come from congestive heart failure, kidney issue, liver, all sorts of things can cause this to come upon you. So you have severe swelling in your extremities or in your limbs. So this man now is going through something. And this man was before Jesus. And keep in mind, Jesus always knew what was on their mind, even though they wouldn't say anything. So here he is now on the Sabbath day, with right now we know the Pharisees at dinner, and there's a certain man there that has an illness. So in verse 3 it says, and Jesus answering spake unto the lawyers and the Pharisees. So when you read the word, it often opens up even deeper. We see the Pharisees, now we have the lawyers. Anybody know who the lawyers are? They have another title. They're spectators, but anybody know who the lawyers are? Nope. You're close though, son. You're close. Some Sadducees probably are there too. But when he said lawyers, just go back to the scribes. Because the scribes are the transcribers of the law, the editors of the law. They are the ones, some teaching said, they taught the law actually to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees could give them to the people in the synagogue. So when he said lawyers, these are individuals who are well versed in law and on God's law. So we see here in this gathering of people, you got the scribes and the Pharisees are there for this dinner. They're there for a purpose. And Jesus says to them, answering spake unto the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? So Jesus now putting them to the test, and they try to put him to the test. Because he knows their thoughts about this thing on the Sabbath day. Now, he also knows that in rabbinical teaching, that if a person's life was at risk, you were fine or okay to heal them or administer medical aid to them on the Sabbath day. You know, he knows his teaching, but nobody wants to say anything because they don't want to be put on the spot themselves, because they know there's an issue with being healed on the Sabbath day. And it says then, and they held their peace. Nobody said a word. And Jesus, and then it says, and he took him and healed him and let him go. So what does Jesus do? He heals this man and let him go his way. After asking them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? Now, you look, the other gospel gets more information on this, but what I've always been amazed at is that when Jesus would do something on the Sabbath day, they would accuse him of doing what? Breaking what? Breaking the law. Why? Because he healed on the Sabbath day. But when I always looked at that, I always looked at something that most time we miss. You would think that if this man is sitting there with the dropsy, with this swelling and all that's going on, and Jesus now, before everybody, heals him, and he walks away, you would be blown away and amazed by what has just happened. You know, you think you even give God some praise for it. You'd be blown away by that, but their attitude always was this: lock him up. He just healed this man. And you just watched a miracle right before your very own eyes, but all they can say is this: you broke the law. It's weird, isn't it? You can say he worked. But here's the thing about the Pharisees and the scribes, the one who bring forth the law, they would tend to twist that law, because they looked at it as you couldn't work on the Sabbath day, right? Do any healing or any kind of work we'll get into a little bit later. But here's the funny thing about that. Aren't they at a dinner? Didn't they have to get preparations in order? Didn't somebody have to prepare food? Somebody serving the people and all that? Somebody's ran there working. But they would overlook that. But anything you would do, they would say, that's work. They are breaking the law. But here you find Jesus heals this man and sends him on his way. And say, let him go. And verse 5 says this: and answering them, saying, this is what Jesus says, which of you shall have an ass or an ox falling into a pit, and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? So in verse 5, say, which one of you would have an ass, an ox, or let's say a donkey, and so, and it fall in, not a hole, but fall in a pit? Wouldn't you get him out? Now think about this. That's an animal that's extremely valuable. That's your livelihood, but it's now falling in a pit. Now he's saying on the Sabbath day, you're going to get him out. But guess what? That ain't an easy job to do. It's not like it's stepped in a ditch. You got the guys to go down in a pit and get this animal out. That's a lot of work. So he's saying if you could have enough compassion to get this animal out of a pit, how much more should you have for your fellow man? But yet you find that wasn't their mindset. They looked at it as you're breaking the law. That's like saying, Wallace, no, I ain't going to say you. Let's just say somebody here goes out today and he run off the road in the car in the ditch. And I'm going to say, I come along and say, you believe that car there till tomorrow? That's work. You can't get the car in the ditch. It got to stay there all day. So you say, no. Certain things you can do, but they would just twist the law to pervert it. But they had more compassion for the law than they did for man. And as Jesus told them even about the Sabbath day, he says, the Sabbath was made for man. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. They had got to the point where the law actually was their life and ruled over them. But as he says these words, which of you shall have an ass or an ox falling into a pit, and will not straightway pull them out on the Sabbath day? And look what happens here in verse 6. It says, and they could not answer him again to these things. In other words, they couldn't say a word because they know he's right with the things that he's breaking. This is why they had issue with Jesus and how he brought it with authority and not as they did. Jesus would tell them things that, I'm going to put it this way, you know, sometimes everybody's thinking something, but nobody's going to say it out loud. These individuals there, they're extremely educated. They know what's right and what's wrong. But because of their peers, they were not saying, they would not speak out. But after these things happened, this what brings us now to our Sunday school lesson. In verse 7 of our lesson, it says, and he put forth a parable to them which were bidden when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them. So now we see why when it says, and he put forth a parable. There's a reason behind this. Jesus is now in this room with these Pharisees, these lawyers. They're the ones who have invited him there. He accepted their invitation. They're now watching him. But Jesus also sees something here. Because in this very first verse it says, and he put forth a parable to them which were bidden when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them. Now, Jesus gives this parable because he sees it as a teaching moment because of what's going on. It's kind of like when you're invited to, let's say, a cookout or a wedding reception, whatever, when you go to that thing, what's one of the first things you do? See if I can figure out what I'm talking about. What's one of the first things you do when you get there? Find a good seat? Okay, that's the first step. Then what goes on after that? What do? Just think about it. I think we all do it. We eating. But what you typically do is this. And you can say, yeah, we do that. You walk in like Miss Helen says. You find a seat. And you start doing this, Wallace. I know I do. I'm looking to seeing who's there, what's going on, and so on and so on. Because keep in mind, Jesus was invited, right? And look what he says. And he put forth a parable to those which were bidden when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them. So Jesus is there. He looking at these people, how everybody's trying to get the big chair. Everybody want to sit where they can be seen and sit by, you could say, the host or the head person or whatever, because they want to be in the spotlight. And Jesus looking around, he sees what's going on. So now he looks at this and says, you know something? It's a teaching moment. And I've always said this, and I haven't heard it talked about too much. He's teaching the right people. Because who is the two groups we see right now in the scriptures? What's the Pharisees and the lawyers, the scribes. They are the most respected people in the community. The most, let's call them, religious people that you could run across. Just imagine that he could open their eyes to who he is and how they could also spread the word. So Jesus used this as a teaching moment when he sees what's going on by saying, let me give them a parable. And as we know, when it comes to a parable, by definition, a parable is a short, simple story designed to communicate a spiritual truth, a religious principle, or a moral lesson. It is a figure of speech or illustration which is drawn from everyday experiences that gives you this earthly story that has a heavenly meaning. And also, Jesus knows by telling stories, people tend to remember it a lot better because it is a great teaching tool. And sometimes stories don't have to be deep philosophical things or deep theology. They can be something simple. I heard two this week. One was, it was about this man. His son is 24 years old. Everybody heard that part? How old is his son? He's 24 years old. Him and his father are on a train. And as the train is speeding down the tracks, his son is looking out the window, and he said, look, Dad, the trees are running backwards. And he's laughing, said, the trees are running backwards. Then he looks up and says, hey, Dad, look, the clouds, they'll follow us everywhere we go. And they're keeping up. Said a woman was watching and said, what's wrong with your son? He's a grown 24-year-old, acting like a child. The father says, I'm bringing my son now back from the hospital. He was once blind, but now he can see after all the rehabilitation and eye transplant and all that, he can now see. The moral to the story, the guy said, was don't judge a person until you know their background. For his son, this was all brand new, seeing things in that way. But sometimes we judge people that way. Another minister was telling a story, give you the shortest version I can of it. He talked about this king back in the day who wanted to see would his people, shall we say, do stuff in the right way or help out. Because there always was a king doing things for the people. So it says the king put a big boulder in the road to see what people would do. You know, everybody came up, saw the big rock there, and their words was, who put this rock in the way? And then they would do this. Nobody would move the rock. Then it says, another one came and said, who put this rock here? This is the biggest obstacle you could ever come across. But the guy said, but I'm going to move it. So he fought and used sticks and pried it and got the boulder out the way. And the king was watching in the bushes. But when he moved the rock, he says, well, no, there was a bag underneath the rock. And he picked it up, it was full up of gold coins. He said, the moral to that story was, sometimes to get you your treasure, you got to go through some obstacles. In other words, not a big philosophical story, but it has a meaning behind it. Jesus now gives a parable, or parables a little bit later here, to educate them on how they're supposed to conduct themselves after seeing them all trying to get the big chair to want to be seen. But as it goes on, he says here, he says here, and he put forth a parable to those which were bidden, in other words, the individuals who were invited, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying to them, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. So what we have going on here, a wedding comes up, and what do you say they're doing? They want the best seats. They want to sit in the high chair. They want to go up front, be seen of everybody. He said, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of them. So in other words, they coming in and they want to be lifted up. They want to be exalted. They want to be seen. Let me give you a visual illustration. That's like saying, I come into church. This is the high chair, right? I come in, I'm going to come up. Well, I can't sit here because the pastor's there, but I'm going to sit here or here. No invite. What was my purpose in coming up here? There you go. Because some might look at it this way. As I stand up here, guess what? I can see each and every one of you. But the person that comes up here is not about them seeing you. It's all about what? You seeing them. Because they want to be seen, they want to be exalted, they want to be lifted up. But here's the problem with this action, but not being invited. I'm sitting down here now like, okay, everybody see me and see who I am. I should have prepped the pastor on this and had him play a part. He come tap on my shoulder and he could say, you need to move down there because I got 5 more people in the back that's coming up here. Guess what? You can already see me, right? Now everybody sees me. In other words, you made the wrong move. Now you've been pulled down before everybody. You've exalted yourself. Now you come low because you want to be seen of all the people. And Jesus says he took notice of this. Hey, everybody was scrambling for the cheap seats. But Jesus also gives some advice. He says that when thou art bidden, verse 8 again, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden. He says, and he that bade thee, and he'll come and say, give this man place, thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. So you have to go down. But he said in verse 10, but when thou art bidden or thou art invited, go and sit down in what? The lowest room, that when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, friend, go up higher. And here's the key part. It said, then thou shalt have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. So in other words, now everybody can see what's going on. What he's going to say is this. He said, if you come in and just walk in and sit down here, that's what you're supposed to do. Then let's say the pastors who use the church come and say, come on up front. Know what people here are going to say? Because they see that, oh, who is that person? That he could be called up front. So now everybody wonder, what's going on with that person? That's what you're supposed to do. Dick and Tyler, Deacon Hall can tell you that here at Brown Grove, when your deacons go to other churches, we never go up front. We come in and we will flop somewhere back here until a deacon there gives us a nod, come on up, or they come personally and say, come on, sit with us. But we always take that low seat. You don't come up and say, well, that's the deacon side, I'm going to go sit with the deacons, because it's not about you. You always take that back seat. Well, this is a little bit different, but even with Brown Grove, once I was even called out. I was called anti by my own people here at Brown Grove. Because we would go to a church, and y'all know how we do. We're the guests. Typically, we're the guests, but we always outnumber the church for some reason. But we're the guests there. Brown Grove, all of them over here. The home church, everybody's over there. I would come in, look at Brown Grove, say, how y'all doing? And I go sit on the other side because we've been invited. I go sit with the people that's over there. I call it taking the low road. One time I messed up here. We had a division. The guest on this side, Brown on that side. I sat in the middle. Only one, because I was trying to bring the folks together. Ended up, I got called to do a lot of work up front because they saw me and said, hey, well, come on up here. You know. But the point about it is you take that low road. So you don't want to be, shall we say, exalt your own self. And this is what Jesus is trying to teach the Pharisees and the scribes at this time. Because they've had this dinner, they've invited him to watch him, but Jesus uses it as what kind of a moment? Teaching moment. So let me teach these individuals something. Even though they think they're educated, what's the old saying about an old dog? Some say you can't teach them new tricks. Jesus constantly was trying to teach them new things. But he says in verse 11, for whosoever exalted himself shall be abased, and he that humbled himself shall be exalted. So in other words, he's saying that if you're coming in lifting yourself up, you're going to be brought down. But if you come in humble, he will lift you up. Last week we talked about prayer. One of the things Deacon Bush says, you have to come in with a humble attitude and give God praise. Here he says, start off humble. And God says he will lift you up. Once again, totally contrary to our ways, isn't it? Remember we dealt with understanding the kingdom? We would say, no, take the high seat. God said, nope. You take the low seat. Then you'll be elevated to the high seat. Does things totally backwards, if I can use that term, from our thinking and our ways of doing things. In verse 15 it says, and when one of them that sat at meat with him heard these things, he said unto him, blessed is he that shall eat in the kingdom of God. Now, in this expository book, one of the books I use teaching, I did not totally agree with the writer here. The writer says here that this man mixed a statement, made it with a smug attitude. He was more looking at as far as by being wealthy and rich, they would be the ones that would be in the kingdom of God and so on from there, and they would be blessed. When you read the scriptures, the verses, it don't seem like he says that. It looked like to me he sees what Jesus, hears what Jesus is saying, and he just makes a comment to it. That's all I see, but he kind of twisted to the point that, to me anyway, he kind of twisted to the point that he said this man was being smug by saying that since we are the big shots and we've invited him, God's going to bless us because we have money and so on from there. But if you read those missing verses, because if you notice, in our lesson, we went from verse 11 to verse 15. So you got 12, 13, and 14. Guess what? It's not there. And this is what happens sometimes when you take selective scripture to show what it is you're saying. It can twist people up. But what you got to do is take the scripture to show what God is saying, not what you're trying to say. Because in between this is what Jesus says. Then said he also unto him that bade him. So Jesus saying now to the one that invited him, when thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. In other words, when you're inviting those folks, you're just inviting them, I'm going to take care of you, next time you take care of me. In other words, it's the buddy-buddy system that's going on. But Jesus said, no, you do something a little bit different. And what he says is this. He says, but when thou makest a feast, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and when thou shalt, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee or pay thee back, for thou shalt be recompensed or paid back or blessed at the resurrection of the just. Once again, totally contrary to our thinking, isn't it? He said, don't invite all these rich people who have this and have this and have that. Invite the poor people. That's what you're supposed to do. And God's going to pay you back. So in other words, God's going to bless you. Unless you just want the blessing now that you have a man, totally contrary to our ways. And after Jesus says that, that's when it says in verse 15, and when one of them that sat at meat with him heard these things, he said unto him, blessed is he that shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. When I read that, I don't see what the man twisted that. Look to me, he might have kind of got it by saying if you do the right thing, God's going to bless you. If you look at it that way, that's the way I'm seeing it at this point. He said, God's going to bless you. And when this man says this, guess what? I look at it as he gets it. And remember, Jesus was talking to everybody? He gets it. But right after that, Jesus said, 16, then said he unto him. You see what I'm getting in there? Now Jesus said, I'm talking directly to you. Because he's the one that grasps what's being said here. He says unto him these words. And when one of them sat at meat when he heard these things, he said unto him, blessed is he that shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. 16 said, then said he unto them, a certain man made a great supper and bade many. Now here's where Jesus goes off into the parable. Now remember, the parable, it can be used in multiple ways. You can have a situation over here, and you can use a parable to explain it. You can have a totally different situation over here, but use that same exact parable to explain that. But also with a parable is this. Sometimes we put too much into everything that's said because the writer just want to give you a point. Everything in that parable doesn't mean that it has symbolism to it. It may just be part of the story itself. But when Jesus goes, he says to this man, he said, verse 16, then said he unto him, a certain man made a great supper and bade many. Now we know this parable basically comes from the Greek word, which is parabolis. It means that which is cast beside or to lay beside. It means you're comparing something. So when he says a certain man made a great supper, who's he talking about? Who's speaking up here? He says in verse 16, then said he unto him, a certain man made a great supper and bade many. Remember, he's teaching here. The certain man he's talking about now is a comparison. He's talking about man, but he's really talking about God. In other words, he gives them a spiritual lesson. God made a great supper, and guess what? The invitation has been given. And when God gives an invitation, that means he has something great and grand planned, right? That invitation has a timely order. You need to respond to it. No one knows what the day nor the hour. But who has a choice to accept? You and only you can accept it. So Jesus gives them a parable by saying these words. He said, a certain man made a great supper and bade many. You see, because this man here can understand this, because guess what? He's the one that invited Jesus and the others that there. He goes on to say, and he sent his servant at supper time to say unto them that were invited, come, for all things are now ready. Who's his servant? Servant is Jesus Christ. Remember, this is a parable he's saying. He sent forth his servant. Remember, Jesus came and said, I came to serve, not to be served. I came to minister, not to be ministered to, that people may be saved. But he said he sent his servant at supper time to say that to them that were invited, come, for all things are now ready. So he's speaking there now really of like, let's say the end times are coming. You know, everything is now ready. The invitation has been given. So he sent his servant out now to invite them all. It says, and they all with one consent began to make excuses. The invite's been given. Now everybody comes up with, guess what? Some sort of excuse. You can use this parable, like I said, in many ways. You can even talk about the church here today. It's not packed, is it? But you ask folks who are not here why they're not here. Some of them have good reasons because they come to worship service. You know, they do their own self-study and things of that nature. But some will give you, guess what? A whole lot of lame excuses about why they're not here today, or why they're not here any day or at any time. In other words, they all begin excuses. And sometimes, guess what? Do we flock together and make excuses? Yeah, we flock together. So I can remember once we went out to away engagements, and we had an individual who came forward and said these words, you going to the program? You going to the program? You going to the program? You know what I was asking that? To see who was going. That caused them to make up their mind whether they were going. But then again, if they found out who was not going, that gave them the idea of Wallace and say, well, I'm not going either. And here you find all of them were invited. It seems to be initially they accepted the invitation. That's why the supper was put forth and so on. But now they all began to make excuses. And now these excuses are given, they just giving you could say examples, basically saying, don't read too much into it. But basically what they're saying is everybody comes up with some kind of excuse. And it may be, what's the term we use? A lame excuse. It says, the first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must go needs and see it. I pray thee have me excused. This person that has done what? Has bought some land. But now they got to go and see it. So you done bought some land, sight unseen. You don't know what it is you even bought. That doesn't even sound right. Unless you paid $1 for it. But if you're paying thousands of dollars or whatever it may be in their culture and time for property, and you haven't even seen it, so your excuse is to go see it. But here's the thing about this land. Is that land going anywhere? It'll still be there. So you have time now to go to this supper. But yet, excuse is made. In the parable, God is saying that his kingdom now is waiting for you. But you're making any excuse you can to do other things, even though you know what is going on. And verse 19 says, and another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen. I go to prove them. I pray thee have me excused. So this one there has bought 5 ox, beasts of burden, beasts of labor, and so on. Now he has to go test them out. That's like a farmer has bought a tractor. Huge tractor, because it says 5 yokes of oxen. That's a lot of horsepower there. But now you're going to drive this thing for the first time. That's like you just bought a brand new car, or you bought a used car, whatever it may be. You never test drove it. You never got behind the wheel. In other words, he's just making an excuse. Because you know that if this was the case, you would have went and tested it before you even bought it. Now, this last one, this is the killer. This is one pass I wish you was there, because this person needs counseling before he did what he did. It says here, and another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Boy, somebody should have told that man, says, you better not marry that woman, because she already got him whipped. Then he said, I can't go. Why? Because his wife. Because he's married. In other words, any excuse that you can come up with not to accept the invitation. But just as that invitation now is sent, it says in verse 21, so that servant came and showed his Lord these things. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor, the maimed, and the halt, and the blind. Now keep in mind, it's a parable, right? What he's saying is the invitation has been sent. But if you don't accept it, guess what? There are others. This is some reflection back to the children of Israel. The word first went to who? Who did the word first go to? Who did God first had to preach to? What people? The word had to first go to who had to receive it first? Some people here. The nation of Israel. It went to the Jew first. But they did what? They refused it. So then they say it must go to who? To the Gentiles. You can compare that with this story here. The word first went to the nation of Israel that they may be a light to the rest of the world. Now keep in mind, I always have to explain this many times to people. It's not that they were any better than anybody else. The only reason they were the chosen people because of the love that God had for Abraham. He said, I'm going to bless thee and bless thy people out there. Because you remember coming out of Egypt, God said, I'm going to destroy all these people and raise up a whole new nation. Well, nothing that great about them. But he had made a covenant with Abraham. But he says, but you have to receive the word first, and then you're going to take that word and carry it to the rest of the nations. But they rejected it. And by rejecting, he said, now it goes to the Gentiles, that they may be a light unto the rest of the world. So here you have rejected it. He said, but guess what? I have an invitation that's sent also, and the word going to others, and this meal is going to others. And then he says, and the servant said, Lord, it is done as thou hast commanded, and yet there is room. So in other words, he's gone out and let's say, brought others in or sent the invitation. Many more have come, but God said, my house is still not full. There's still room. So there's always, I can say always time, but there's always room, for others. But as it says, he said in verse 20, and the Lord said unto the servant, go out into the highways and the hedges, and compel them to come, that my house may be filled. The highway and the hedges now, the hedges are basically these thick briary bushes and all, but I'm not getting into all that background right now. Basically, the highways are those who are travelers, and the hedges are those who pretty much, teaching will tell you that these were like the homeless folks. They lived in hedges and bushes and things of that nature. So what it tells us this, as far as the comparison go, the invitation goes out to who? Everybody. You remember, they were rich, they were poor, they were healthy, they were lame, they had homes, they were homeless. You name it, it went out to everyone. It went out to. But then the last verse says, if we close out, he says, for I say unto you that none of those men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. Now, the ones he's speaking of now, the ones who refused to accept the invitation and made all kinds of excuses. He said, the day is coming, guess what? Well, they won't taste of this. There's two other stories that's given in Matthew and that of Luke dealing with the 10 version with the oil and another wedding. About time is of the essence, and everybody kept making excuses, and they want to get in. He said, too late now, the door's locked. The hour has come past you. So Jesus once again gives these individuals, you could say, a parable as a teaching tool to accept the invitation. Now remember at the very beginning, what did we say about the title of this lesson? And it was more of a command, remember that? So when you get to the end, then you go back, all Jesus saying, accept the invitation. That's why I put a exclamation mark beside it. It was more of a command after reading this, accept the invitation. Stop making excuses, because the day is coming and God says it's going to come when the door is going to be shut and you shall not taste of the supper that I have prepared. So this is what he was dealing with in responding back to the kingdom and understanding God's kingdom. Now, our lesson next week is a real good lesson. Well, all of them are good, but next week we're dealing with a warning for the hard-headed. Helen got it right. It's hard-hearted. But I got a twist on that thing. Okay? It's a warning for the hard-hearted. Really, it's for the hard-headed is what it speaks of here. Because this is a powerful lesson that deals with a certain rich man. I'm going to give you an example about this lesson. This is where the poor man wanted to eat from Lazarus' table. I'm not going to teach the lesson. I'm going to tell you what a preacher said about it once. And it's a shocker when you hear the title. But this guy preached this message. This lesson next week is all about how this poor man wanted to eat from the rich man's table. But they both died. And it goes basically, you could say, to hell and whatnot, and they wanted some water and things of this nature and so on from there. Well, he gave the backdrop to it, and he says that it was a revival. He said, come tomorrow night and put your seatbelts on, because he's talking about these two men that was in hell. He said, tomorrow the message is going to be, what in hell is going on? You get the point he was making there? And you'll see this next week in this lesson dealing with these, once again, these hard-headed people. I'm not calling them hard-hearted. They're hard-headed people. When Jesus teaches a lesson about the rich man and the poor man, they ended up, you could say, in hell here. But that's next week's lesson. Then still with Luke, 16th chapter, at verse 19 is where we are starting at. So with that being said, shall we rise to our feet? And let's have a closing word of prayer. Shall we pray? Father, it's once again upon this hour and upon this time of the morning that we come with you with thankful hearts. Thank you, dear Lord, for all that's been said here yet this morning. And we ask as always and pray, dear Lord, that what we have heard, what we have seen, what we have learned, we will retain it, dear Lord, not for our benefit, but also to help benefit to others, that we may teach them as Christ took the opportunity to teach and expound upon what thus saith your word. And then, dear Lord, as this class, Sunday school session is coming to an end, we ask, dear Lord, that you will continue to be with us as we go into the worship service, dear Lord. We ask you the Spirit truly will be felt in the very midst of it, and that, dear Lord, you would touch Pastor Beecham from head to toe, dear Lord, that he may make preaching easy and the word may be accepted. Dear Lord, bless those that are here and those that still be on their way, and also those, dear Lord, for whatever reason it may have been, could not be today. Bless us all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.